Welcome to Mountain Stream TV. Today is Thursday, August 2nd, 2018. I'm Avram Friedman. And we have with us this morning, actually this afternoon, we're pre-recording this, Rabbi David Shneyer. Thanks for coming, David.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good to see you again. We're old friends. We've known each other for a long time. David is an activist. He lives in Maryland, and he has a summer home here in Franklin. Actually, his family has owned that home for decades.
It's my wife's family.
Your wife's family, your family, and he's here visiting this summer. You and I have an interesting history together. Both of us have been committed to environmental activism and working for social causes over the years. You have committed yourself to nonviolent civil disobedience at times and been arrested, as I have, and that's a deep commitment, and it's an interesting thing for a member of the clergy to be doing. And I know there is a history of clergy that does that, but I want to get, if you would, give us a religious perspective of environmental activism or activism for social causes in general, and the tradition of the religious community being involved in that.
That's a lot to answer.
Yeah.
Right there. The tradition, certainly the Jewish tradition, going back to the prophets, and even before the prophets, from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses itself, speak so clearly about creating a more just and compassionate world. There are incredible teachings that relate both to environmentalism and responsibility for this earth and for the natural environment in which we live, and also incredible teachings really directing us to create a more just society. The very beginning of the Torah, we have the very first chapter of Genesis, first of all, that we as human beings are all created in the image of the divine. So that basically creates a playing field, that we have a responsibility, to each other, because we're all created in the image of the divine. In the next chapter of Genesis, it's pretty clear also about our relationship to the earth. In Genesis 1, it talks about, how, we are created there at the end of creation, we human beings. Adam, the word Adam or Adam also means a human being. The word earth is Adama, of the earth. So there's an intimate connection going back to the very origin of the creation story. But it says that, we're here to kind of to be in charge, to conquer. So it uses the word to conquer the earth and to eat of its fruit and vegetables. In fact, the diet in the very first chapter of Genesis is a vegetarian, fruitarian diet. Some people looked at that first chapter and said, well, gosh, that doesn't sound very good in terms of the earth. It implies that we have superiority in a way over the earth. But in fact, there are other interpretations that say, well, it really means that we have a deeper responsibility. The second chapter makes it even clearer, because it talks about, once again, in the second creation story, the creation of the human, to be a shomer Adama, or shomrei Adama, to be guardians of the earth, stewards of the earth. And those of us in the environmental movement in the Jewish community, and also I know from friends in the Christian world as well, have taken that as a directive for our lives, to be stewards and to take care, to protect. The word lishmor means to take care of, to protect, to guard the earth. And on environmentalism, throughout the Torah, there are teachings about the Sabbath itself, just the Sabbath as a day, one day a week, when we're asked to be in harmony with nature. It's a radical concept, to be in harmony with nature, not to plow, to plant, to destroy anything in nature, but to be at one, in harmony with nature, and also with the social environment, not to engage in business and commercial activities. So there's an intention for the Sabbath to be a day of renewal and to be in harmony with the earth itself, and also with the social order. A radical concept. Later on in the Torah, there are incredible teachings about from Leviticus 25, how every seventh year the earth is to have a Shemitah, a sabbatical year. A sabbatical year where the earth is allowed to just rest itself. The earth deserves a rest. So these are radical concepts that that have informed me over the years, and I've ever since I learned these concepts, and it goes back to when I was I guess in college, maybe even a little earlier. And I also grew up in the country, so I had a special awareness. Anyone who grows up in the country has a special connection to the earth, to the woods, and it's one of the reasons why I love to come down here. And so happy that my wife's family, with two other families, bought this beautiful place near Franklin, so I can spend time there. And so in Leviticus 25, there are these teachings. So that gives you an idea of where it's coming from. Social justice, the prophets were about social justice and taking care of the needs of the less fortunate in society. At the core of the Torah at the core of many of the teachings of the Torah is the concept of pursuing justice. There's the teaching, justice you shall pursue. Mentioning justice twice, and why twice, and there's one interpretation that says to really emphasize. It's not only justice for yourself, it's justice for others. It goes beyond your immediate circle, but it encompasses.
It's a core belief of the religion.
Core. If you take justice out of the Torah and out of Judaism itself, it falls apart. It just falls apart, and so that meant a lot, and the teachings of the prophets have meant a lot to me.
And yet, in terms of the environment, there is a struggle within our civilization from different religious beliefs and interpretations of the Torah or the New Testament and the Old Testament. There was an issue here in Jackson County, North Carolina, about the county was trying to pass a steep slope ordinance, which would have been the first one in North Carolina at that time. This was maybe 10 years ago. The issue was that the population has increased so much here that people started building on steep slopes of the mountains because we were running out of flat land. and so people were taking chances and building in places where they really shouldn't be building. It's dangerous to build on steep slopes, and it has all kinds of environmental ramifications, including we have to build roads, which causes erosion of soil, and so there's a lot of scientific evidence that said you shouldn't build on anything above a certain grade. And the people who are into the development industry got all up in arms, and the people who had bulldozers and the land movers and all these came to the public hearing. They lined the roads with bulldozers and earth-moving equipment and all kinds of things. And I remember one in particular man testified from a biblical perspective, saying, God told us that we're supposed to plunder the earth. And that the prediction was that one day the earth would be flat entirely, and that was his rationale for engaging in that business, despite any environmental ramifications.
Right, I love to study with him sometime.
Right. Yeah, and I would love you to be able to as well.
Yeah.
But there is that mentality, basically, that God gave us this earth to plunder and to destroy the earth for our own purposes, to do whatever we want to, rather than to live in harmony. And I said to myself, how could this be that there could be two different interpretations that far apart of the same text,
It's you can find different interpretations. In fact, in the Psalms, there is a phrase in the Psalms. It says Hashemayim Hashem la'aretz natan l'bnei Adam, that the heavens are for God and the earth is given to humanity. So that phrase, which he didn't quote, he could, and if he's listening, he could use it in the future, would seem to indicate that, the earth is ours. But the way I understand it, and the way others who I deeply respect understand that, is that we are the guardians of the earth. It's given to us to be the stewards of, to take care of, not to abuse and not to pollute, and as we're doing today.
And certainly religious thought has to be impacted by the scientific knowledge we have now and the awareness of our greater environment, and the fact that we're living on a relatively small planet that has limited, finite resources. And it's not something that we can, perhaps back in biblical days, mankind did not fully understand that and thought that it just went on forever. And so we could plunder here and go on and plunder somewhere else and then keep moving on indefinitely. But now we know that pretty soon we're going to run out of space.
For many of the issues, how do we grow and use the earth responsibly?
Yeah.
Just to an example, 38 years ago, the county council, the elders of Montgomery County, Maryland, really led by a man of great vision who was the director of the Park and Planning Service. The county at the time, his name is Royce Hanson. He is still very active. And 38 years ago, he and the council designated 1/3 of Montgomery County, Maryland as an agricultural and recreational reserve. It's 93,000 acres. And because they saw, we have to think about the future and about where our food is coming from, even though agriculture was kind of at a low as an economic resource, there in that part of Maryland, that we have to look into the future and preserve the land and to build responsibly. It's called smart growth, and you've perhaps talked about this before. The county where I live, Montgomery County, has been very, very conscious of how new communities are built, in the county, being built around metro stops, where the metro system runs on the major corridors of the county, and the county council is heavily behind that in Montgomery County, as well as the population. And so this is a great model for other.
Yeah.
One third of a county. It's pretty outrageous that we can't. It's
That's awesome.
It's on. I direct a retreat center.
And it's such a highly populated area. I mean, that's
incredibly so. And and people are concerned about where you're going to build, where you're going to live in the ag reserve. And I direct an ecumenical and spiritual retreat center in the ag reserve. We're on 28 acres. We're just originally part of a farm. It had been a convent for 23 years. It had been a monastery for 22
I didn't know that.
22 years.
What's the name of the retreat?
The name that we kept the same name that the previous owner had, Sanctuary. So it's called Sanctuary Retreat Center, and you're welcome to look it up, sanctuaryretreatcenter.com.
Okay.
And we do environmental programs out there. for not just the Jewish community, but for the larger community. We partner with the Montgomery Countryside Alliance, which is the watchdog organization of the Ag Reserve, it's called. So there's this great concept. We run a program each summer for up until 2 years ago, and then we stopped doing it for a bit with teenagers, bringing teenagers from the city out to the country to our retreat center, learn how to garden, and also to learn kind of environmental ethics. In fact, a couple of years ago, we took them on the last summer of the program, we took this particular group of teenagers on a tour of Appalachia. We went to southwestern Wise County, Virginia, where they went into this really depressed area where mountaintops had been blown off, and they spoke there with with folks living there on both sides of the fence. We went in Asheville. We stopped at Woodrow Wilson College. We spent a few days there, interacting with the people there and learning what they're doing. And we visited with up on near Black Mountain. I forget the name of the. Your son is there.
Ziv,
at Earth Haven.
Earth Haven.
Earth Haven was an off-the-grid community for them to.
Warren Wilson College.
I'm sorry. What did I call it?
You said Woodrow Wilson.
Oh no, Warren Wilson. Warren Wilson. Sorry.
Yeah.
We shouldn't get credit. We shouldn't give. And to experience different communities living in Appalachia and the lives that they lead. Our last weekend, which also fell out on the Jewish Sabbath on Saturday, was spent at Yogaville in Virginia, where the kids also learned about the threat to that community by Dominion, planning to put a pipeline through.
The Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is a terrible thing that's happening to that.
There's two pipelines. There's Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Have you made contact at all with the Highlander Center in New Market, Tennessee? Do you know about that?
No.
Well, the Highlander Research and Educational Center is it's about an hour and a half from here in New Market, Tennessee, eastern Tennessee. It's where Rosa Parks was trained and many of the leaders of the 1960s civil rights movement. And they still operate in the same manner. They have people coming from all over the world to train there in community organizing, nonviolent civil disobedience. They train the trainers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
we're taking a field trip. The NAACP here and the Canary Coalition are organizing a field trip there on August 11th, which is coming up.
Wow, that would be a great place to take members of our community.
Sounds like something that you should make contact with them for the retreat center, for your retreat center.
Yeah.
Yes, his historic site as well. It sounds similar to what you're doing in some way.
No, I'm all for organizing more field trips with especially with our youth, but also adults. Sometimes I've done it more with adults. Taking adults on trips twice to Israel and Palestine to. These are dual narrative tours of the country and the land and the state of Israel and the Palestinian West Bank, and those have been quite informative. We also have been to Cuba a couple of times.
Really?
This is not something that most rabbis would do. Although the B'nai B'rith organization has traveled to Cuba. There are many times over the past.
Are there synagogues in Cuba? Is there a Jewish population there?
Yeah, it's not very large. I think Havana, it's something like 5,000 Jews in Havana.
It's considerable.
On the whole island, just maybe 6,000 or 7,000. So we visited there, but anyway, that's off a little bit off.
No, we're freewheeling.
But the idea of bringing adults, into Appalachia for the same kind of tour that the teenagers did would be eye-opening, and
there was so much. I was, I wasn't particularly searching for links within religious studies to the environmental community. I was already involved in the environmental community back when my son became bar mitzvah. But as it happened, the Torah portion that he
Right.
where that his birthday related to was Baal Tashit in Deuteronomy,
Oh, Baltashki, yeah.
which and the theme was that when you're involved in a war and you besiege a city, you should not cut down the fruit trees of your enemy. Are not the trees? Are the trees your enemy? You know,
Right.
basically. And so from that, as I understand it, much of the religious community draws the inference that, well, if you're not supposed to cut down trees even during time of war, how much more so during peacetime? You know, and
The stronger references to fruit trees.
Yes.
Baltashki, and the concept is it goes beyond fruit trees. I mean,
Right.
But beyond trees, it's any
Exactly.
kind of abusive use or wasting.
so that's just a little aside
Yeah.
about
That
my,
is-
my personal connection with
Yeah.
that, because then my son Zev was compelled to write a sermon about this.
Ah, okay.
And I think that studying that concept
Mm.
impacted him deeply,
Absolutely.
and influenced the course of his life from that point on. And of course, he's become an intense environmentalist, a deep ecologist in many ways.
So our teenagers actually studied with him when we went to Asheville, outside of Asheville, to the Earth Haven community.
Yes,
They loved his teachings.
right.
It's great.
So what are the issues that you were involved with? Now, I know, I think I last saw you at a demonstration when we were both at the Keystone XL pipeline
Oh, yeah.
demonstration. I think you were arrested there. I was not. I was
Yeah, yeah.
filming that day.
Yeah, there were, that particular time, there were 100 clergy that were arrested. And of course the arrest there, and this is in front of the White House,
Right.
across from Lafayette Park. They're prearranged arrests. Like in the olden days, we used to spend actually some time in a cell, in D.C. jail. Now the way it works most of the time is that they're prearranged. The bookings take less time. You're taken to a holding center. You pay a fine. It's
It's
different.
not always that way, even today. I mean, it just depends. First of
Yeah.
all, something I learned, I helped to organize some civil disobedience in Charlotte, North Carolina, where 43 of us were arrested. And there's no guarantee that the police are going to do what they say they're going to do. They're in charge. Once you deliver your body, and I had some people say to me, well, it's not like it used to be when in the days of the civil rights. So that may be easy for you to say, but when you put your body in the hands of the police, you are giving yourself up to their mercy. And you,
I mean, here, this is when you got arrested?
anywhere you get
Anywhere?
arrested, anywhere you get arrested, you may have negotiated. You have people who negotiate with them beforehand, but the police are going to do what they are told to do or what they want to do,
Ultimately, yeah.
and not necessarily what they negotiated with you.
Really?
So in this case, they did. I mean, but that same day, or that's at that same event, when you were arrested for the Keystone XL pipeline, Bill McKibben had been arrested 2 weeks before, I think, and
That's right.
and they kept them in jail for 2.5 days.
That's
That's
true. It's probably, I'm not sure
and
what the arrangement
what
was.
happened was they were the first ones to get arrested, and they tried to make examples of them to discourage others from following.
Well, yeah, that's probably why they were held longer.
Right, but when they realized that there were 1,200 people who were going to get arrested or whatever it was, then they shortened it for their own bureaucratic reasons only. It wasn't because of
And economics too.
And
It's tremendous,
absolutely,
costs a tremendous amount of money to.
right.
So-
But I still, the point I'm trying to make is that if you ever decide to participate in civil disobedience, don't assume
That's right. Don't assume.
that everybody's going to be nice to you and that they'll be gentle and and do what they say they're going to do, because it's just simply not that way.
Right, you need to be prepared for either.
That's right. You have to understand that you are giving up your body to the mercy of the authorities. And it's not an act to take lightly. It takes deep commitment and sacrifice.
Yes.
And if you're lucky, it works out well. You know?
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I was arrested was in was in December of 1970, and this was for Soviet. Then they were known as Soviet Jews, who had been arrested in the former Soviet Union for trying to leave, the Soviet Union and leaving in a on an illegal way, and so they were arrested. And there were protests all over the world. And we decided, the group that was with at that time was called Jews for Urban Justice, and we decided to protest at the former Soviet embassy there on 16th Street. The first night of Hanukkah, Hanukkah being a festival of liberation as well, and it made a lot of sense. So we organized, and there were maybe a dozen or so of us there, and we made a little bit of noise. And we took our Hanukkah candles and ran across the street and smashed against the fence. And the guard at the guard at the embassy, came running after us. Who's your leader? Who's your leader? And Arthur Waskow, who was a very, very well-known activist and rabbi now, he said, "God is our leader."
Oh boy!
And we went off into the night. Then we gathered later, to kind of like, wow, how did they have any impact? Well, there was no media there. There's no news. It was like didn't happen.
If a tree falls in the forest.
So wait a second. We've all kind of been involved in kind of either civil rights or anti-war. We can do better than this. So we figured, Hanukkah's 8 days, so we figured we had it's like 7 days to organize. So we started organizing. Our friends, others. We got in touch with the media, got in touch with attorneys. We started organizing. Came back with a couple hundred people. Okay, the last night of Hanukkah, of course, across from the embassy, and at that time it was a federal offense to congregate within 500 feet of a of an embassy. Okay. It's a federal law. So we gathered there, and we chanted and this and that, and the police were right around the corner. I mean, and the cop cars and the paddy wagons. And they, basically, then the police chief gave us a warning 3 times as they were supposed to do, and there were 13 of us actually that didn't move fast enough. Okay, and so 13 of us who were arrested out of the close to, I figure, about 200.
So you didn't intend to get arrested?
We didn't know. We didn't know.
But you were willing to.
We were willing to get arrested.
Yes.
We didn't know if we'd be arrested or not. And we did have attorneys that were kind of there to take care of things if they got out of hand. The weird thing about it was that most of the attorneys were arrested. Of the 13, it was 12 men and 1 woman, which we thought was kind of interesting because, it's like the 12.
That's a minion.
12 tribes. It's more than a minion. It's like the 12 tribes. And the tribe of Dinah. There was one woman. They had 2 paddy wagons. 12 guys were put in 1 paddy wagon, and the woman who was arrested was put in this paddy wagon all by herself. And they took.
They must have been Orthodox police.
They had to know what. I know. Really?
Separate the men and the women.
So they took us off to D.C. jail, for the night. And meanwhile, our friends were running around trying to find an attorney to help us get out. We didn't have.
And as a result, all the Jews were allowed to leave Russia and go to Israel.
Well, actually, so what happened? We did eventually get out. We had to pay a bit of a fine, and it worked out. And it did make the paper.
Yeah.
It made the paper, and that's the main thing. The media was there, and the same thing with it's if the media is not going to be present, it really is
purposeless, right?
Yeah, it's
which is the reason we started Mountain Stream TV.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things that the grassroots groups were doing all over, well, all over everywhere, but here in Western North Carolina, we'd contact the media, and sometimes they wouldn't show up. We decided, you know something? We'll become our own media, and we'll go and video record what's going on and put it on YouTube,
Yeah.
so that there's a record, and we can, you know, with grassroots effort on the internet, Facebook and everything, we can spread it out and show people that this has happened.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. You know, the Poor People's Campaign, which several weeks of protests on Monday, tomorrow Mondays, and throughout the country, and several thousand people were arrested throughout the country. And I know that in some states, you know, there was some significant reporting.
We have
the
big Poor People's Campaign
here. Yeah. Well, in Washington D.C., there were significant protests.
I'll bet.
And the arrests and protests were not reported. There might have been once in the Washington Post that it was reported.
But I'm sure it got on the internet because of all the people with their cell phones and the grassroots media like Mountain Stream TV.
It got on the internet, but still, when the leading paper, you know, in the Washington
didn't make the evening news.
Doesn't make
right.
Forget the first page. You know, what about, you know, the Metro section of it? You know what? I mean, it. You know, and in many cases, the media was just not present at all.
I've seen it a thousand times. You know, I remember going to a protest in D.C. after Bush's second election. I think there was an anti-war against the Iraq. The Iraq War. I guess there were 200,000 people there, and a little article in the Washington Post said demonstrators have come to D.C. You know, didn't give accurate numbers, said tens of thousands or something like that, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have been on the front page, but it was so small an article that you wouldn't have known that something major had just happened. Meanwhile, there were Tea Party demonstrations with 12 people that they were putting, you know, giving a lot of press to. I mean, that's just the nature of the thing. That's why it's so important that we be our own media and develop our own networks.
And also, I think we might reach a time where we need to protest at places like the Washington Post.
That's
you
true.
know, and you know, actually make a greater stink about you know, certain things not being covered.
That should be too.
Yeah.
But I think we have to. I mean, the Washington Post is now owned by Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, who represents a certain political philosophy and the ruling class in this country. And there's some things they simply don't want us to know about, or they don't want us to understand the full scope of protests that are happening on certain issues.
And I think a lot of people are starting to see that.
Well, I hope so.
Well, it's surprising how many people are still not.
Well, right, but I think you're right. I think that people are beginning to understand that there's a certain sort of class warfare going on in this country that's been going on for a long time, and that you know, we have been. It's very Orwellian.
Orwellian.
What's happening in this
I've
country.
had a few conversations with folks in Franklin about what's going on with this country, and most people I've spoken to kind of laid back, pretty much. It's not like I live in, you know, Rockville, Maryland, Washington D.C. It's the Beltway, you know, and it's in our faces every day, you know, in the news and in the paper, the Washington Post, but also in the news, every, you know, major station, you know, you're just filled with the politics, you know, and the struggle going on in this government, where folks I spoke to in Franklin didn't feel the same, like it's not in their faces. That's, you know, just not in their faces. I don't know what it's like in Silva or here in Jackson County with your local papers,
Well,
but
I mean, some things are in their faces. Poverty is felt drastically in Western North Carolina. You know,
is it front page? Is it second page? Is third
Oh,
page?
certainly. It is sometimes. For instance, our state legislature refused to accept Medicaid funds from the federal government under Obamacare that could have insured up to 500,000 people in the state that have no insurance, including thousands here in Jackson County and Macon County and Western. Oh yes, that made the front page. You know, there are some things that do make the front page and other things that don't, but I think the economic issues are felt here. And people are beginning to become aware of it. You know, in the Democratic primary in 2016, Bernie Sanders won all of the western counties. Even though this is a relatively conservative part of the state,
They understood.
people, yes, they did.
Yeah. No, they understood his message also. I mean, there are those of us who really respected him for getting out into the country, the countryside, getting into those parts of the United States that other candidates, you know, did not even care about visiting.
And talked about issues that other candidates would never confront. You know,
So I have a lot of respect for him.
yeah, I do as well. And of course, he has formed an alliance with Reverend Barber, also in North Carolina.
Yeah.
But I just want to get back to that Keystone XL pipeline demonstration. I actually filmed you, and I don't know if you've ever seen that segment. And I interviewed you at that time, and you had in that segment explained that you had the last time you had performed civil disobedience was against a power plant.
Oh, right.
And that seemed to do some good, you said, because it apparently stopped the construction of a power plant?
No, it forced the power plant to clean up.
Okay.
You know, their the emissions. They were in violation of the emissions from their stacks, from the smokestack.
And then you participated in the Keystone XL pipeline demonstration in which some 1,200 people were arrested. It was a huge 2-week-long action. And that succeeded too, ultimately, in combination with other actions around the country. And but certainly a large part of what convinced Obama to cancel the Keystone XL pipelines were those demonstrations in front of the White House and around the White House, and the intense political pressure. And so I think it has to be acknowledged that it works. It doesn't always win, but it works in generating publicity and in making the public aware and in creating public pressure. Public pressure is real. The power of the people is real, and the more intense activity, the more commitment that people have, the more powerful it is.
Absolutely.
People have power, and I think that's an important message to deliver. So often I hear words of discouragement, like you're wasting your time. You know, nothing we do matters. There's power, people in power, and they never. But every social movement that's ever succeeded in this country and elsewhere in the world has succeeded because people got involved and organized and formed alliances.
Exactly.
And continued to make sacrifices and to deliver their message and form political pressure. The power of the people is real. It overpowers money. It overpowers everything ultimately, from freeing the slaves to forming labor unions to giving women's rights to vote. I mean, look at the women's movement. You know, to me, that's probably the most remarkable achievement in terms, maybe freeing the slaves. Well, that took a civil war, but the women's movement, women did not have a single representative in any state legislature or the federal government in Congress, and they were demanding the right to vote, and somehow, because of their organizing and their sacrifice and what they did, they gained their rights as citizens. That is something. What that says to me is that the power of the people transcends even constitutional rights. Because they didn't have any constitutional rights. Women were considered property.
It is our constitutional right to organize.
Well, they were beaten and starved and tortured in jail. So, for all practical purposes, they didn't have any constitutional rights, and even some of them had to fight off the men that were in their own household in order to participate in that movement.
Their constitutional rights were not respected.
Right, but they weren't considered people under the Constitution, so they didn't have constitutional rights. It was the 14th Amendment that gave rights not to women,
Oh, that's right.
but to freed slaves and certain Indian tribes that had already surrendered at that point, and other groups of people. It greatly expanded, but it didn't include half the people who were inhabiting the continent, and that was women. They literally did not have constitutional rights because constitutional rights only applied to people who were defined as people.
So that's when
in the Constitution.
That's when the amendment was precipitated, the equal rights, equal access. What's the phrasing? That everyone has equal access or equal access to the law, my constitutional.
Well, all people, are created equal. But the thing is that the Constitution defined who a person was. And at first, it was only white men who owned land, about 5% of the population. Those are the only people who had constitutional rights.
But you're saying that was defined by the Constitution?
Yes, it was. Who a person was.
I have to read those amendments again.
Well, it was. I mean, but then the 14th Amendment defined freed slaves as person. Remember, freed slaves were only three-fifths of a person according to the Constitution. You see, so they were not included under constitutional rights, and women were not either.
Right. So, so you're saying we're making progress, and
well, I'm saying we're making progress, but what I'm saying
it's a horrendous history.
What I'm also saying is that we have to remind ourselves and remind other people that we have real power inherently as human beings, regardless of any system of government we live under. That we have God-given rights, if you will. That we are powerful entities on this earth as individuals. And we have to remember that, and we should never allow ourselves to believe that we are powerless, that we are helpless in the face of the opposition of moneyed interests, of special interests, of the fossil fuel industry, the big banks, these incredibly powerful entities that have taken over our political system. That those forces can be and have been historically overcome again and again and again and again. And each generation has to learn that, because I think we are learning it again. I think the younger generation is learning it very well. But I think it's our generation that has to learn it.
So the phrase, the arc of history bends towards justice.
Yes. Well,
I think the messianic vision in faith or religious terms is exactly that vision. And we are obligated to work to create, a society, a world, that is just and compassionate and loving. We're absolutely, obligated to do that. In Judaism, it's very clear, and in all the other faith traditions that I'm familiar with, it's very clear. Where the vision is of a world of social justice and harmony, and it's not easy getting there, but we're not allowed to desist from the task of getting there. It's, if we want to, be part of that, call it the messianic hope or hopefulness, then we have to be engaged. We have to let the divine within each and every one of us speak to that vision of the future, prophetic vision of the future. I know from my Christian friends that that the aspect of the divine, some call Jesus within them, speaks to that same vision. The light of the divine within each person, moves us in that direction. If we don't build bridges and come into coalition with each other to create a better world, then that light is diminished, and things can get darker. And what I find very exciting now, in the midst of all this darkness, coming from different places, in our world and from our government, is that people are finding each other, and there are coalitions being created, now, and a greater awareness that, because of it, there's a light. There's a light that
It's very powerful.
is working.
And it's so important that the religious community become involved. Here in North Carolina, what's developing is the Creation Care Network, along with what the NAACP is, and Reverend Barber and his predecessor, not his predecessor, the man who's taken over his position, Rabbi, Spearman, Dr. Spearman, also a very enlightened man and very powerful man. But it's, for a long time, I feel like the progressive forces in this country sort of abandoned its alliance with the religious community, creating a vacuum that allowed the religious community to be taken over by the right. Did you ever read The Left Hand of God by Michael Lerner?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he explains the difference between the right hand and the left hand of God, where the right hand traditionally, biblically, was meant to smite those who abuse their power over poor people or the weaker, the strong. And so God would intervene with his right hand to stave off that oppression.
That's right.
But now it's been perverted in a way where the right is using the right hand of God to smite poor people, using their power in the name of God to to oppress people.
Yeah, they're using a certain language to support their political beliefs and also their insecurity. There's a lot of insecurity, within this world, and within people who are feeling left out. We met people like that with the students that I took to southwestern, to Wise County, Virginia, and there are a lot of people felt that they've been cut out, and that their society, their world, has been taken away from them by the urban corporate elite, and so I have a certain amount of compassion for people who feel so insecure, and as a result, read the text, I believe, incorrectly, inappropriately. Michael Lerner was referring to Yamin Hashem Osechayel, the right hand of God is to mete out acts of justice and righteousness, and compassion, is the other.
Is the left hand.
Is that side. And we Montgomery County, going back to Maryland, we have within our county, and it's rare to find a county in the country with such a council. It's called the Faith Community Advisory Council. And there are 10 or so members of the faith community sit on this council. It was convened by the county exec, like Leggett, who will be leaving office this year. He's basically fulfilled his terms in office. And the purpose of this council, is to meet, unmet needs, in the county, toward the most vulnerable members of the county, to identify those needs and to work and help build coalitions of people who are serving those needs. That's one task force. There's another task force that is to work on educational needs, bias issues, prejudice issues to deal with racism. We've, over the past 2 years, we've created dialogue evenings, community dialogues where people have gotten together, anywhere from 60 to 100 people throughout, over the past 2 years. We've trained 22 people to facilitate these dialogue groups, and they're having an impact on people's lives, and the police also come to many of these dialogue groups. You see, so there's something going on there. There's a need to people to talk, and so we have this Faith Community Advisory Council, which are basically liberal and progressive faith leaders. I mean, there are other faith leaders in Montgomery County that kind of scratch their head and kind of where our retreat center is located.
It's important for them to be aware of what you're doing.
Well, absolutely, because that voice needs to be heard. Because too often the voice of the right, in religious matters, is the voice that's heard, and and those of us who are kind of speaking a different voice need to get out there and speak our voice, because we also represent that these deep teachings that come from, whether it's the Torah, the prophets, the New Testament, the Quran. I mean, you have all the major faith traditions have very positive things to say about how people relate to each other. Yeah, there are issues. There are issues in the Old Testament. There's this God of wrath. So we have to take a look at that, understand it, move on it. Every major religious tradition has evolved out of out of some of these more fundamentalist, if you wish, kinds of teachings that have been and are meant to be interpreted and evolved. We have in Judaism we have a body of literature called the Talmud, which are the discussions and debates of the sages, of the rabbis, taking these teachings and bringing them to a higher level. And then we have the teshuvot over the centuries of different rabbinic courts and sages, rabbis, scholars, taking us to other new levels, higher levels. Hopefully, it's higher levels of awareness. In our own time, the receptivity in recent decades and the inclusion of women, and LGBT individuals in the religious community have been enormous. So, and we find this in other faith traditions as well. So there's a movement, to higher aspirations and more inclusivity in life, because once again it goes back to the first chapter, at least in the Jewish tradition, the Old Testament, and the Christian tradition of we are created, all of us, in the image of the divine.
And I've learned a lot as being involved in the NAACP. I'm a vice president of the local NAACP, and being involved with Reverend Barber and the Moral Monday movement, and
I've been with him a number of times.
But he's a wonderful man, but not just Reverend Barber, but just being involved with the entire religious community. That is such an important aspect of the statewide NAACP, international NAACP. Spirituality is just part of that. It always has been part of the civil rights movement, and it means so much. It's so important to the success of the movement, because without that spirituality, whether it's grounded in traditional religious traditions or not, just feeling that component of your actions and your planning, and just being together with people who are motivated by that spirituality propels the entire movement forward and keeps it cohesive. And there are, don't get me wrong, I mean, there are members, and Reverend Barber acknowledges this and welcomes people who are agnostic or atheistic, as long as they have a belief that there's a moral bent to the universe or whatever, how he phrases that. That's fine, but it's still, my feeling is that it is driven by spirituality, and the music of spirituality is so important as well. the music of the civil rights movement, and it is being adapted toward today's movements as well, especially in the Moral Monday movement. And that's something I know you have been involved with.
Yeah.
Music as well. You are a musician. You recorded music with the Fabregan singers and others.
The Fabregan fiddlers, yeah.
You recorded at least one album called Smoky Mountain Shabbos.
Smoky Mountain Shabbos, that's right. Another one called American Chai.
American Chai.
Chai
I
is
think
the
I have
Hebrew
that
word
as
for
well.
life, American Chai.
Yeah. Chai means life.
Life in Hebrew, American Chai.
Right.
And some songs from Rock Creek and another album, Love Songs and Blessings.
Yeah.
So yeah, and our band has participated in numerous concerts over the years for social justice and environmental justice. We have coming up in 2 weeks. It's exactly 2 weeks, and heading back to Maryland to kind of do some
I
organizing.
should have asked you to bring your guitar or banjo or something.
It's in the
musical instrument.
sorry, it's actually in the car. Yeah, so we're doing a concert along with a Latino band in 2 weeks to raise funds for legal services for the separated families. There is a tremendous need to provide these children and their families with legal services, either attorneys or other aspects of legal services that are so terribly needed. There's been a call out there for more attorneys to get involved, but not all of them can work pro bono or even low bono, so there are 7 or 8 members. These are congregations within the Jewish community that decided to come together in solidarity as a Jewish community with this particular need. We're also, and the funds would be going to some of the funds to the ACLU.
This is an effort to try to reunite the families?
These are to provide funds. This is a fundraiser.
Right.
We hope to raise several $1,000s to reunite the families.
Yeah.
I mean, this is horrendous. I mean, this government
who would
has
have thought
essentially
that we'd have to do something like this in this country?
Essentially, this government has kidnapped these children.
It's horrible.
So
without any records of where the kids came out.
it's terrible.
Yeah.
And people, a lot of people in our communities, individuals have made contributions, but we need more communities to come together as communities in solidarity. So we have, we're calling it a Love and Justice concert, solidarity concert, for this purpose of raising funds. One of the organizations that particularly I just like to mention their name, it's called KIND. Kids in Need of Defense. This organization has been around for about 10 years, as I understand. Another organization is called HIAS, which means it's an acronym for the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, national organization, which 100 years ago, really helped Jewish refugees, come to this country and settle them. Well, there are very few Jewish refugees that are needed that aid. So over the past 20, 30 or more years, the focus has changed to any refugee or asylum seeker, and there's a tremendous effort to assist now. So the funds were collected with those organizations. So I encourage, communities of faith to come together, to find each other in solidarity, to fight this horrific decision, that was made by this government that needs to be corrected to preserve our own sense of worth as a country. Moral integrity as a country is at stake, and individuals.
It's very frightening what's happening in this country right now. The resemblances to what happened in Germany prior to World War II are just too striking to ignore. The way Trump has been consolidating power, attempting to consolidate power, and to usurp his power as president, or to usurp others' power, to consolidate within the presidency, and the racism and the scapegoating of various ethnic groups and refugees, and I mean immigrants, Muslims. There couldn't be a clearer parallel between what he's doing and what Hitler did.
It's obviously, to me anyway, coming from a place of great insecurity, not only within perhaps himself, but also great insecurity that is felt by millions of Americans, mostly white Americans. Tremendous amount of insecurity about the direction of this country and how they understand it and interpret it. And we become increasingly polarized over the years, and this goes back to the Obama administration. I mean, no one is innocent, and even earlier than that, you know, we've
But
been,
nobody before him that I can remember consciously fed that division the way he is doing that. It seems intentional to me.
I know, but right, it's terrible, and what we have to do even more so is realize that we all live in these bubbles, and we have to somehow get out of the
Break out
bubbles
of the bubble.
and allow ourselves to learn about the individuals who are feeling such insecurity,
Right.
and to hear their voices, and because
Yes. We do. We have to speak to the people who find the Confederate flag to be a symbol of heritage to them without understanding that it's a symbol of oppression to others.
right. Where are the conversations happening, in this country about that? There's a tremendous amount of healing that has to be done over civil war, over, just all the issues that have threatened the social fabric of this society. It's tremendous amount of healing.
But
Take a lot of work.
I think we have to look to what Nelson Mandela did in South Africa. He, after spending 20 years in jail,
That's right.
came out and decided to go into a process of reconciliation rather than retribution. And because retribution serves no purpose in the long run, but we have to learn to live together, basically, and understand each other. And it's a very interesting program that was developed by a man named Dr. Enrique Gomez, who is the president of the Jackson County NAACP. He did this presentation about South Africa, and when Mandela took charge, he redesigned the South African flag. There was a flag that was strictly of the apartheid South Africa, and then there was a flag of the African National Congress, and he somehow combined symbols that were in both of them into one flag, and it was beautiful. And then he did the whole thing with the soccer team, the rugby team, which was traditionally a purely white sport, and he integrated it, and they put resources into training the rugby team, and they had won the world championship.
I remember.
And that helped unite the country. Just symbols are very important, and he used symbology to unite the country in that way. And I think we have to go through something similar in this country. It's never been the Civil War ended, but it was never truly reconciled. The Reconstruction period was not very successful in what it was meant to do. It created a lot of resentment and harsh attitudes and fear between people.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that. It's something very basic in this country, I think.
Absolutely. in western Montgomery County, where our retreat center is located, that is it's a very conservative area of Montgomery County. Montgomery County is very democratic, but out in Westmoreland County, which is mostly country and has a different kind of history, there are a number of us in town, a couple of ministers and myself, and a member of the local community, decided, well, we need to have discussions in town here over various issues. And so this little committee created a dialogue committee, essentially, and we decided, well, let's bring people together to hear from a minister, okay, an imam from the Muslim tradition, and a rabbi. Okay.
And this is not a joke.
This is not a joke. This is not a joke. Yeah, it certainly sounds like a joke. Just basically talk about the three Abrahamic religions, and basically our tenets. Each person would speak for 10 minutes, talk about the tenets of our religions, and then open it up to the Poolsville community that came out to listen, to ask questions. Okay, because underlying so much of the insecurity is just a lack of awareness, a lack of meeting the other, lack of knowledge. So this is an opportunity. And this will be one in a series of dialogues. And so we decided to do it. And the two ministers and I went back to our clergy association in that part of the county. And no one felt comfortable hosting it at their church. They felt that, there would be pushback. I thought it was, because of me. And it wasn't so much because of me. It was, I think there was an issue with the Muslim representative. And they felt uncomfortable opening up this kind of discussion, in church. Most ministers, most clergy, and this is also a problem in the Jewish community, just can't talk about certain issues, okay, because it's just too divisive within their congregations. So what we wound up doing is renting the cafeteria, at the local high school. And we held this first town hall meeting on the three Abrahamic faiths, and there were about 50 or so people that came out, and we made our presentations, and there was a very fine civil conversation, a lot of questions, a lot of exchanges, and it ended very nicely. I noticed in the back a local Baptist minister was sitting with a couple of members of his congregation, more in the back, and they hadn't participated. They were listening. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Baptist minister that he really thought it was a very good evening, and that he wanted to bring this conversation into his church, okay, into his Baptist church, okay. This is revolutionary.
Yeah.
Okay, and so over 3 successive Sundays, he brought a black minister in, okay, a black minister to speak to his congregation before worship on Sunday mornings, and he brought in the imam who spoke, and he brought me in, okay. We did this over the 3 successive Sundays, and about 40-50 or so people came out, and we were introduced, separate Sundays. We introduced, and then people had an opportunity to ask each of us on these successive Sundays questions, that they were interested in hearing more about. And it was a major breakthrough. It felt like for so many people like a major breakthrough.
Go on tour with that.
Go on tour. Well, this is not that we should go on tour, but every community should be doing this. Here in Silva, what would it mean to bring, an imam, and a rabbi, and another minister perhaps, into a church, to have a conversation like that? What would that mean? How would that look? It needs to be done everywhere, and I think it takes a little courage. It takes some courage to do it, but as we saw, once it's done, it's like, wow.
It opens people's
the light. It's like talking about the light. There was a light that came, that was present.
I would love to have seen that. That's my sound.
Yeah, it's great.
David, we've come to the end of an hour. I told you we'd go fast.
Yeah, you did say that. Yeah.
But we should continue this conversation next time you come this way.
Okay.
Let's make it a habit.
I can have it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
David, yes. So
And good
to
luck
see
to you and everything that you're doing, and
you.
to the community that you are speaking to, and hopefully energizing, and good luck to everyone. It's very important work that is being done, that needs to be done.
Okay. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching Mountain Stream TV, and we'll see you tomorrow.